Good afternoon, everyone. So, talking to one of my students about Handy's cultural matrix and obviously the corporate culture unit ahead of paper 2. Thought it'd be quite good. This article about Baidu was in the press, I think, on the 10th of the month and talked about the corporate culture. Baidu is the Google equivalent in China. Sorry if I've undersold them. So, 2 past paper questions first of all on corporate culture. You'll notice that they do not mention any individual aspect of Handy's model, but it would be quite handy, especially, sorry about the pun, to get in something to do with the type of corporate culture when we're analysing it. I think it'll also help you to write those wide-ranging logical chains of argument as well, which would be good. So clearly we can see straight away Pure Gym is a budget gym, and here in the case study, if you do this past paper question, these guys had the saunas and the swimming pools, but they were struggling. These would have probably maybe 1 or 2 people on duty, so a very much power culture of this is the business model, low frill gyms and stuff like that, where you could be cleaner, manager and everything at the same time. And here we would have, I don't know how many, that's a question mark, how many staff, but we would have the beauticians and the fitness instructors and the pool maintenance guys and stuff like that. Okay, so we could be looking at more, I don't know, task, those sorts of things, or it might be people around the centre manager managing their own profit centre. Quite important. Down here again, if we were planning this, likely consequences and Sports Direct corporate culture. We can define corporate culture. Sports Direct retailer needs people, for example, to work in shops. Sports up here for the Pure Gym, sorry. Obviously they need a person for most of their gyms. So here the top question is whether Pure Gym is likely to overcome the possible difficulties. Well, this is my hook. Okay, whereas down here it's the likely consequences, which is going to be positive, negative to the format of obviously the 12 markers, so we get those extended arguments. Now, possible difficulties up here, well, guess what I'm looking for in the case study, and I'm going to need some counter arguments, especially around the new business model of Pure Gym at this time. Remember, this was an older paper, and also the economic climate at the time was moving towards budget gyms, which is why these guys were bought for, I think, 90 or 100 million quid or something. Not a lot of money for a national gym company. Okay. In here, for the Sports Direct one, we don't have the direct aims and objectives, likely consequences for Sports Direct. Well, I want to know the context. I want to know what the company does, who are their competitors. Something from the case study must have the aims and objectives in there, so I can link my hook back to the question as much as possible. So if we look at our past paper feedback here from the examiner report, you can see this is based on that one there. So it was accessible to most students. Most students were able to demonstrate the understanding of corporate culture. Yeah. Some weaknesses lacked balance. This is where corporate culture questions can be quite risky, because you might be highly opinionated. You might think that Mike Ashley is very autocratic when he was running the company back then. So if your answers are not balanced, you're not going to get top marks. You won't get more than half marks if they're not balanced at all. Now, you need to think about that. Now, also, another thing we've got in here, which is the main reason I put the comment in here, is centres are your teachers and Dalmatians, reminding students that 4 out of the 12 marks are because of your evaluation. This is why we focused so much on making sure that you contextualise your conclusions. It is really, really important that you contextualise those, and the justification isn't a new argument, but it adds another element to it. Okay? Think about those MOPS orientated future statements, something that changes in the workforce or the market or something. Okay, 4 out of 12 marks according to the chief examiner from 2017. In this one, we are looking at one that got 7 marks out of 12. You know, not exactly a horrible mark, but it's not very well balanced. Okay, it's well developed in the first paragraph. Consideration of their second paragraph's attempts, that's not a compliment, to provide a counterbalance. The student has not established the link between the culture and its ability to keep low costs, which is why up here, when I said it doesn't tell me the aims and I want to know what's going on in the business, well, it could be that this is one of the aims that I mentioned in the case study, and therefore that needs to be part of my answer. Or we see this is a direct quote from the marking grid, unclear arguments, and this is something that we all run in fear of in the classroom when we leap to that conclusion and we don't actually explain how we got there. That's what the chains of argument are there for. You explain the logical steps towards what you're saying. You can't say, therefore, increasing, I don't know, world happiness without explaining how we got there, or it is classed as an assertion. Go and look for that word in the marking grid and you will not like the mark that's associated with it because it's a level 2 word. Also, this person didn't take the top tip of before you go overall in conclusion, they should go back and they should look at the likely consequences. They want to know what the hook is, for example. Consequences to Sports Direct will be linked to their aims or something in the market. Okay? You've got to make sure you directly answer the question. Sometimes people will get to the end of this and say, so the likely consequences is the question, and they'll say, overall, I recommend that they give the staff a pay rise. Well, I'm sure that would be lovely. It's not the question that's asked. So before you write your first summary conclusion, go back and quickly check the question before you write it. If you've done hook with a couple of scribbles, then you will be fine. It'll take you a second. And then one line, answer the question. Consequences would be, overall, I think this is positive for Sports Direct because their corporate culture is. Now, this one, for example, same paper, we've got level 4, 10 marks, which is fantastic. It's 2 away from full marks, so we'll class that as an A star. Good understanding, well structured, supported throughout. The chief examiner's just used the words from the marking grid. Lots and lots of context here, directly linked to their culture. Maybe they've mentioned power culture, for example, and then they've added something a little bit more into the justification. They've future orientated it and they've talked about that it's a retail business and they need lots of staff. They might have even mentioned the staff in question, seasonal demand at Christmas time, loads of sixth form kids coming in to work in Sports Direct. Context is king. Let's make sure we listen to the chief examiner's feedback. So there's the link to the examiner reports. They're all on Edexcel. You've all got access to all of them except for the 2023 papers, which are still locked. So here is the model of handy without me going through it, because I'll go through it in the pros and cons. You just need to memorize some of the characteristics of this. And there's a little bit of a bleed between some of them. And it could be that the culture changes over time. So if we're thinking about the entrepreneurial business startup, we've just done the case study with Ryan and Gemma from Hydra Creative to do with leadership and entrepreneurs in class today for the lower sixth, obviously. And it's very much, it was centered around Ryan. The business started to grow. He was struggling. He had problems letting go and the trust issues. So he brought his wife in, Gemma, to help him run the business as it started to grow. Okay, it might be that it was very personal. Yeah, your notes will say person. I found this online. It says personal. It's the same thing. And to start off with, maybe it's very focused around that because it's linked to the entrepreneur itself. It could be that we are very much rapidly growing in different sectors. We could see conglomerates, for example, thinking about those high-paced growth in different silos, maybe. It could be that we've got our Baidu case study, which you can read. Now, Pause the video, read this. This is the full article. I've got a cutback version for the question. Pause the video, read it, and link it into different elements, and you identify exactly which role it is. I know I've mentioned power before, but it could be others. Hopefully you pause the video. So everything starts with a good definition, and if it was something to do with assess the likely impact of Handy's cultural model or the power culture or something like that, then I would probably write something similar to this. This helps me to think what I'm going to find in the case study. But going through culture, we know it's centralized decision making, quick responses. The example there from the article, top-down approach, lack of empathy. She doesn't even know what year her child is in its school at the moment. So everyone's different, that's fine, but that might not resonate with some workers. That's why it's important to recruit the right workers and the right leaders into the right culture. And if the culture is going to change, then you might want to think about changing your leadership. Look what happened to John Lewis. When they were going through steady times, steady growth, that cash cow stage, they had Andy Street. Sorry about the election, Andy. And then they brought someone else in when they wanted to make loads and loads of people redundant. All of those tough decisions are made. They worked her out of the business. They've now got someone else in. Okay, it needed a different leader to come in to actually shake the culture up, make some tough decisions and move on. Quick decision making, clear leadership. This is what's happening, my way or the highway. And this reminds me very much of Taylorism with top-down approach. Managers know best. Managers will tell you what to do, when to do it, and how to do it, and what good looks like. And as long as I'm paying you a fair wage, you should be motivated. Remember, Taylor is more than just money. Low employee morale, especially if you recruit the wrong people in. If we were thinking about McGregor, and I know it's not in the Edexcel spec, if we were to bring in Theory X employees into this environment, maybe they would love it. Yeah, they're just going to get on with it. They know if they step out of line that they're going to be in trouble, and maybe that's what they need, so they can go leave work and live the dream outside of work. The Theory Y people will feel, well, my creativity is being stifled. Okay, make sure you recruit the right people for the right environment, and you can guess which one is Frederick Taylor. Okay. So, role culture, very organised, very structured and everything else. I thought of the Home Office, and we can see employees of specific job descriptions, responsibilities. We are probably going to have a change of government in the UK soon. The civil servants will not change. Okay, they will go through. You've then got that consistency. You've got that stability behind the scenes in government, no matter how communist the new party will be when they come in. So if you think about it, not anymore obviously because Corbyn's gone, but if you think about, we need predictability, we need people to understand what they're doing, and the Labour Party haven't been in government for years. Now it doesn't mean they don't know what they're doing, it just means that they might not have been in those frontline positions. They're going to need the civil servants, so it's good that we've got that stability and predictability, and we'll see what happens when they have the election, probably in November. Who's a betting man, hey? Or dog. Large organisations, highly structured, maybe working in those matrix organisational structures with different departments run by different whoever's. Very interesting. Disadvantage is very difficult to change in fast-paced environments. So case study, you should look at how rapid, dynamic this market is. Maybe role culture is not great for a dynamic market. Maybe you can decide. Again, think about those happy or unhappy members of staff. Now, actually, this theory linked to these government departments, lots of people stay in these government departments for their entire lives. And that's because there's a good fit. So don't generalise. Employees are going to be frustrated in a role culture. Just because the textbook says that doesn't mean it's true. I've met a couple of people that work for government and they left school, went there, and they're still there in their 50s and they love it. They've travelled the world, they've got loads of development, and they're working for a very stable employer, so at least they can plan if they can afford to buy a new home. They love the job. Just because the textbook says employee frustration, don't generalise. Look in the case study. So task culture, as it says there, expertise-based teams, and very much matrix organisational structure here. But in some ways with Google, it gives them that extra flexibility. We know that Google give their staff 20% of their timetable every week to just be creative or sleep or play ping pong or something. But they've got strict targets and expectations, or they're out the door. This isn't abandonment. This is actually helping them with creativity. Flexibility, innovation, employee engagement, working in these dynamic project-based teams, and maybe you'll have different teams that are more or less dynamic. I'm thinking the security guards at Google probably don't get 20% off every week, so they can go and be creative about security solutions. So let's not generalize across an entire workforce. Let's read the case study. Disadvantages are, well, maybe there's conflicts, maybe there's duplication of processes in these different matrix. Go back and revise your organisational structures. Who would have thought that theme 1 could possibly be in paper 2, hey? And if there's lack of structure or perceived lack of structure, if you've recruited the wrong people into that, or a leader that comes in and clashes too much with that, then you might have problems. Imagine mergers and acquisitions as well, by the way. Two cultures, like in the Pure Gym LA Fitness case study, totally different cultures, even though they're both gyms. So, task culture, bit of Google dropped in there. Here's a graphic that you can have a look through, and I've mentioned there, 20% off, and yeah. Self-explanatory. Person culture, obviously we're looking at individuals for their expertise, and it could be a team around that person, or it could be individual or small groups. McKinsey's are a great example of this, and if you're not signed up to the McKinsey's newsletter, please do before you go to university if you're studying anything to do with business. They're very generous and they share everything that I can see, and if you've got an interest, they've got something written on it. High motivation, lots of talent, lots of, innovation, working around central projects with small groups of people sometimes. That very much consultancy based, PwC, EY, Accenture, those sorts of companies. Deloitte's, can't not mention Deloitte's. And yeah, so coordination challenges. Well, if you've got all these different people with different ideas, then very much democratic. Strength of democratic is if you get consensus, then brilliant, but actually getting everyone to agree. Sometimes different parts of the organisation might be working in different directions. This could cause problems in the future. You can have a look in the case study for them. Here is the McKinsey's 7S model. I haven't taken this too much from Investopedia. Thank you very much for the graphic. And it's all about aligning these different things, systems, skills, shared values. You can have a look a bit more about that, but very person culture. Now, moving on to a question, assess the likely impacts of Baidu's power culture on its employees. I thought I would do something with power culture or culture in the question because we've not seen this before. And if we see this on Tuesday, yeah, you can send me a nice email saying thank you. But if we don't, then it's good practice. Likely impacts, obviously the start of our hook of the power culture. So that's obviously our knowledge. We're going to define in a second on its employees. So it's really quite obvious what we're looking for here. And remember, employees are not one group of people. There might be different employees depending on the case study. The first thing you would do is you would write a definition. Here is a definition to some point. Power culture is characterized by centralized control where power is concentrated in the hands of a few individuals. Decisions are made quickly, authoritatively, often with little input for the lower levels. This can lead to an autocratic environment as seen in Baidu. It's a bit of a gobful, to be honest with you, but it's a 12 marker. And look at all the stuff that I'd be looking for in the case study. I've written this, and if I can get this sort of memorized, few employees, autocratic environment, yeah, I've got a lot to look for in the case study. Pause the video, read the abbreviated version of the first case study, or if you've already memorised the first case study, write your points out and see if you can come up with a reasonable answer. Pause the video now and then I'll sketch out the rest of the 12 marker in a bit. Did you pause the video? Doubt it. But there we go. So power culture can significantly harm employee morale. This is obviously my point. In a power culture, employees often feel undervalued and overworked. This lack of appreciation can lead to dissatisfaction and decreased motivation, reducing productivity and increasing labour turnover rates. So far, all of this is textbook, total abstract, and there's nothing wrong with it as long as it goes into some sort of context. So we're sort of justifying this. Productivity is one of my pet hates in the classroom and is overly generalised. I want to know what productivity is, to be honest with you. Jing's statement that she was not their mum, and her focus on results over employees is an example of this. Okay, so what we see is they've got the lack of appreciation and an interpretation of the case study. Okay, even though the word productivity is abstract, and I apologise. However, quick decision making, or just remembering the textbook, aren't we, can sometimes be beneficial to the fast-paced search engine sector. This is not in the question. This is a bit of application instead of it just saying textbook counter-argument, because if it's not in context, let's pretend it doesn't actually count towards your marks, as it allows the company to respond swiftly to market changes. Okay, there's a bit of context in there, and we know it's a counter-argument because of a previous slide. Power culture can stifle innovation. Obviously, that's my point. Innovation thrives in environments where employees feel valued and empowered to share ideas. The power culture, the autocratic approach, just a bit of a repeat there, but can encourage employees from proposing new ideas or challenging the status quo, limiting the company's ability to innovate and adapt. Again, it is my chain of argument, and it is very much textbook based. Then we need evidence that is interpreted and linked to that statement. Jing's harsh management style, including threats to employees' application, or their employees' careers, creates a fear-based environment. This atmosphere is likely to limit creativity and discourage employees from taking initiative. So up here it says about initiative and empowering ideas, and down here it interprets the case study. Okay, give it a tick. However, clear leadership and direction from the top can sometimes help streamline processes and maintain focus on organisational goals. At this point, you should be shouting at the screen about what is wrong with that sentence. Can you work it out? Where's the application? Ooh, where's the extra screen? Where's the application? So there's clearly something a bit wrong with that, and we've got to go careful. Then we would, if I bring that back, I'm then going to think about my overall question. I go back, I look for my hook, likely impact of the power culture on the employees. Overall, the power culture at Baidu likely has a negative impact on its employees by lowering morale and reducing innovation. So it's not brilliant, but it answers the question. Okay, and remember that feedback we had from the chief examiner. This answer doesn't explore different types of employees because I can't really see different types of employees in the case study. I'm not going to invent employees. Unless I really know Baidu's business model. There's no point in me mentioning those security guards, by the way. That's just you randomly putting stuff in. Use the case study, you'll be absolutely fine. There's loads of evidence in here I've not used, such as going on a 50-day trip. Well, hopefully you haven't got children. Without addressing these issues, now we all know my happiness about using the word without when at all possible, not always. Without addressing these issues, Baidu risks high employee turnover and reduced long-term competitiveness. Okay, so up here it says about lowering morale. Down here it gives us a bit more detail. But remember, it needs to be contextualised. To mitigate these impacts, Baidu could benefit from adopting a more balanced approach that values employees' contributions and fosters a supportive work environment. Or this could simply be the different culture than we're used to, measured to that of on par with Google. Now, it sounds lovely to a point. Now, we've answered the question up here. Without these, they may risk this. Okay, well, that sort of justifies something, and it is a bit of a MOPS. Okay, even though it's a little bit abstract. Mitigating the question's not asking me for recommendations of how to improve stuff. So even though this sounds a bit all right, to me it's like, yeah, it's nice, but let's just cross that out. Not that we're allowed to do that if I was an examiner, not a Dalmatian, but yeah, it's interesting and it's all context. There's a bit of Google in there, I suppose. I didn't manage to scribble that one out. Now, the true question is always going to be, if I didn't have all of that, yeah, and I'll leave the Google in there because it's nice to have a bit of Google comparison to other cultures, as in just leave them alone. It's all about impacts on employees. Okay, now we've got contributions, fosters, supporting working for. That's just a bit of a counter for up there. It's not something extra. Now, is it accurate and thorough knowledge throughout, and is most of it contextualised? I think, yeah. I think most of it is, but that is not. Okay? So, yes, it is, but have we got this contextualised supporting judgment? So the judgment, in my opinion, is sort of there, but not. Baidu risks high unemployment and reduced. That's very. The justification's there, but it is abstract. Okay. Now, so I'm thinking that supported judgment is sort of there, but it's not brilliant. Is it contextualised, wide-ranging, and not the conclusion? Now, I think it's level 4. I think it's a reasonable answer. It's not too bad. It's somewhere in level 4. I'm not as enthusiastic about this answer as I would normally be. Examiner behaviour might be just to drop this in the middle. I wouldn't give it a 10. I would probably give it a 9. And hopefully you agree. And if you were to give it an 8, I don't think I would be offended. Hopefully that was useful. And at this point in the game, just presenting perfect answers is of limited value. Good luck in your paper 2 exam. If I've got a bit more time later, I might do something on sources of finance, especially as there's a certain